So, hi everyone, welcome to CX with Chopra. In this podcast or series of discussions, we are going to talk a lot about customer experience. Uh, why customer experience? Because I feel in the past 2 decades, we have talked a lot about digital disruption. And I feel that this digital disruption has happened. And now, especially if we talk about after pandemic as well, now I think everybody started talking about customer experience and customer experience transformation, because I think now the landscape has changed. Now everybody is on digital. The way things have evolved and the way customer expectations have also evolved. I think the playing field has changed altogether, and that's what I think makes it very exciting to talk about customer experience. And even if I read an article for Forbes as well, and Forbes also mentioned that managing CX customer experience should be the most important things for brand right now. And what excites me about the whole topic is that if you talk to 10 CX professionals, you'll probably hear 10 different answers of what CX is. And that's what makes it very interesting and exciting. And at the core, I believe CX is, fundamentally is an art of perception. You know, that perception which get builds, through the messaging, let's say the brand does, the interaction, let's say you have with the employees of the brand, the interaction or your interaction with the product or the service itself, or sales process, after sales process. So the whole cumulative effect of all these transactions with employees, platform, product, builds that whole, perception. And that perception then becomes your customer experience. And that customer experience is something, which will build your brand trust, which will help build brand reputation and eventually propel sales. And I feel that's why everybody is now interested in talking about CX, and it's become very important and rather pivotal for a lot of companies as part of their strategy. And but it's not that easy to crack as well, because when we talk about perception, now perception is something which is very, very individualistic. It's how I perceive the world. It's my version of the reality. And that's why you seeing people arguing, because everybody has their own perception and their view of the reality. So as a brand, if my scale of my, let's say, target audience or TJ is, let's say, 10 million, I'm just putting up a number. I can't go on understanding perception of 10 million people. And that's probably impossible. But what I can do is I can shift my lens, and instead of perception, focus on perspectives. Because with CX, which we'll talk about, I think, in our discussion as well, that, what part of the business, what functions inside the business influence CX, So with CX, there are multiple layers, there are multiple perspectives that we can build. And perspective, how it's different from perception is that in perspective, you think through from the other person's lens. You think about the customer, be in customer's shoes, and think through how that person goes through their day and how they're going to perceive. And then building those perspective from a marketing standpoint, from a tech standpoint. When I say tech, it's more about, the whole experience of interacting with the brand. From an analytics standpoint, from even a product standpoint, product owner standpoint, from a founder standpoint, how passionate they are about the whole CX. So all that perspective, I think, is what we're going to build, and in the series of discussions or podcast. And so welcome to CX with Chopra. And today we have Naveen Yadav. Thank you for joining. So he started. I'll give you a brief introduction. Uh, so he started his journey by doing mechanical engineering, and then went on to do MBA in marketing from IIT Kanpur. And then I think early 2000, he started as a business analyst with GE, where we started working on customer analytics and marketing analytics as early as 2000. And then and then he moved to US for 4 years, where you're part of the CMO office, working closely with the marketing function, doing marketing analytics. And then you went on to lead the marketing analytics function for GE, the whole practice. And then you've led the analytics team for Publicis India, Publicis Sapient India. And then you moved towards the advertising side, where for Facebook or Meta. So you were leading the marketing science function, and now you're the measurement head for Google. And so, welcome to CX with Chopra. And it's very interesting. I mean, because I started with saying that digital disruption has happened. You know, and you started looking into customer analytics or marketing analytics, or you went to US. I would say that early part of 2000, probably 2002, 2005.
So, first of all, thank you for having me. It was 2004, so I'm not that old. So let's get to reducing the age by 4 years. But yeah, 2004 is when I started, and my journey has been more at the intersection of data in the pursuit of driving customer and marketing outcomes. That's how I would say that. While the first half of the career was more on customer analytics, the second half has been more on advertising and marketing outcomes. Had the privilege to work with some of the important critical brands in the industry, but more so have really seen the evolution of how data-driven decision making initially was a core only to banks, and then sometime in 2007 and 8 it moved outside of banks to other industries.
Right.
So that way, I think the evolution of the industry to use data to drive customer and now advertising outcomes has been really interesting to watch. And now with AI coming in and including generative AI, some of the cool stuff that people are trying to get done is even in the creative world, if with the prompt, can you generate a creative image or a creative video?
Correct.
So that would make lives of some of the creators in a few years far more simpler. And people usually ask questions: who would win the race? It's the creative guy who uses AI will win the race, as against the guy who would not. So it's here to stay in that sense.
But the reason I brought that up is, while you were in US around that time, is because that time the whole digital disruption was happening. iPhone got launched, then YouTube got launched around that time. Even Kindle was launched 2007. And a lot of things, even things like Bluetooth, early 2000, it caught up. So a lot of things were happening around that time. And in the initial years, it used to be, US used to be the leader, and then things used to trends and used to follow. So looking at that whole journey, because at that time, customer experience, nobody was talking about. It's more about, people are looking at, oh, this is a new device. How do you get used to it and then work? And now you have so many options. So you've seen that whole digital disruption with close eyes and seen. So how do you define, and coming to CX now, the importance of CX, like we are discussing right now. So how do you define CX?
So I think as you rightly point out at the start, it's a phrase, customer experience. So that means it has to be from the eyes of customer. That's the key. And it has to be sum total of all customer interactions, pre-purchase, during purchase, and post-purchase. Now, historically, the ability to stitch that data together, even at the aggregate, was missing with most organizations. And what has happened in the journey from 2007 till date, one could argue, now we have the ability to stitch that journey together, at least at the cohort level, if not at the user level. Which means if we did a branding campaign, we know of the customer segments we targeted, what were the outcomes on the brand side, on the brand awareness, on the brand consideration, etc. Similarly, if we followed it up with another market activation campaign, how did that funnel look like in aggregate, from creating an awareness to creating an intent and down to taking action? That has been, in my mind, has been a good piece to watch out for. Having said that, there are still cases where you would find this breaking, and the reason it breaks is because you have organization silos where there is no single owner for customer experience per se in most companies.
Correct.
And even if there is a role of a customer experience officer, it's a warm and fuzzy role which dotted lines to multiple functions ranging from marketing to operations to sales. And therefore it becomes hard to define the KPI for such a role
I think
because it's shared responsibility.
again, I can draw a parallel to early 2000 when social media came. So social media manager used to be, a role which everybody was like, what this person will do. Are they going to just browse Facebook and, look through what's happening, or, and but eventually it matured, and now it's very much part of, every brand's, strategy, especially around awareness. So yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting. And I mean, now coming to the whole point of evolution of CX, I mean, obviously it has also gone through the journey, and now with the digital disruption it has happened. Now the worlds of AI, now the worlds of your UPI payments, with mobile adoption. I mean, things have changed dramatically. So now we are talking about CX in terms of experience. But I'm sure back in the day every organization was doing it. It wasn't like it was a new concept, but the focus was different. Probably.
I think the way to think about it, there are multiple drivers which are responsible for us getting to where we are right now. In the sense, customer expectation was not so great, competition was less. At least I remember in my dad's time, they were okay waiting for 7 years to get a landline. And
Even
in order
Bajaj
to
Chetak
book a
had some
Bajaj Chetak
2 year
had a 2 year, right?
right.
So the people had higher patience level to wait for the wait for certain products to be delivered to them. Now that when market opened up, thanks to our Prime Minister Manmohan Singh or the Finance Minister Manmohan Singh back in those days, it created a lot more companies to compete against each other on quality, on customer experience, and on a variety of other things. But back to the point on the evolution, I think even the mature markets like US went through the same journey. If you were to broadly classify into few stages, there was possibly a product orientation or a services orientation or
Product focus initially.
wherein Henry Ford would say any car will sell as long as it is black.
Right.
If I remember, 1908 is when they launched
Correct. Yeah.
Ford Model T, right? And to the point somewhere in 70s, I would say the banks started mining some of the data, at least to make personalized offers. And they were not necessarily driven from the need to be customer centric. They were driven from the need to mitigate their risk, because banks were offering this credit. And if you were to offer this credit, you can't offer credit to everybody. You need to segment your customers based on their ability to repay.
Right.
And therefore, in my mind, that was the first set of journey in 70s when people started getting personalized offer, but more driven by risk team to make sure they don't run into NPAs at the end of
it was more of
the
a
year.
risk mitigation.
And I think in somewhere in 80s is where I would say some of the companies ranging from Nike to Starbucks, the traditional companies, not the digital companies, set a different benchmark. Even Apple was in the same league in 84, 85. And when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 96, he took it to a different league. But those were the companies who set the benchmark for great customer experience. I remember, I don't know, they're still there, may not be because this is old school, but FedEx on their paycheck used to say, for the employee paycheck, used to have an imprint which says brought to you by customer. So that's how they were driving customer centricity for the employees.
Inside the organization.
Right. There's a philosophy which says if you have a happy employee who is culturally oriented to serve a customer, that's the starting point of driving culturally some of the customer centric. So from product centric, probably in 70s and 80s, we moved to customer centric. And now with so much of data available, we are moving to more customer experience centric culture, wherein companies are trying to use that data to stitch and break silos across brand and sales and marketing and post sales and service in a relatively much more seamless manner.
Right. I mean, because if I look at those examples like early 1900s, like Ford you said, or even 1980 Sony Walkman, the focus was more on the product quality, features. I mean, if you have great features, I mean, assumption was people would automatically buy it, right? And that's what used to happen. And then the gear switched to customer focus, with the likes of Amazon starting in 1995, where it was more around customer feedback, taking that feedback and looking at what are the customer demands. And the success criteria shifted more towards customer loyalty, customer satisfaction. And that's, I think, probably Amazon starting with their whole personalization, how this went on going about it. I think probably that also was, I feel, was a shift in gears at that time.
So I think if the product quality is table stakes, then experience is differentiator.
Hmm.
So if there is no difference between a Swiggy and a Zomato,
Hmm.
then experience would be the only differentiator between the two.
Hmm.
And what has happened in the last many years, the barriers to entry to a new business have relatively reduced.
Reduced.
If the barrier to entry has reduced, then sustainable advantage would be to drive customer experience to improve that loyalty, stickiness, and repeat purchases. When Amazon says that they are world's most customer centric company,
Hmm.
and they drive some of those initiatives which nobody else would, like
Hmm.
what they call as prime delivery or 2 day guaranteed delivery, or no questions asked return policy,
Even Amazon Go for that matter.
or Amazon Go.
Fully
Amazon Go is an
automated checkout.
excellent example of
Right.
customer delight.
Right.
So they have raised the benchmark of what customers are now expecting on customer experience, which means your ability, if the product quality is pretty much similar,
Hmm.
then customer experience would play a critical role to retain that customer, to expect better repeat purchases, and overall for a company to drive more
Hmm.
value for their shareholders.
Very interesting, because if I go back to my Kotler days, marketing MBA days, the branding 101 which we used to learn is that typically brands would start focusing on functionality. That you first nail down on the functionality,
Yeah,
be extremely superior on that,
yeah,
and then move towards the emotional connect,
yeah,
to build a brand.
yeah.
Ray-Ban, classic example, where, I mean, if I look at some of their older advertisements in the print, so they all talked about functionality, how underwater divers are using it, how pilots are using it, how fighters who go in the tank, in the desert, how they are using Ray-Ban. So just prove themselves on functionality. And then later, when they establish themselves, later that's where, they move to Tom Cruise, he's wearing it, and then, it became a cult, and then it's easier because once it moves from functional to emotional, I mean, the whole price parity, it goes out of the picture in a way. People don't look at it a price value proposition, it's more of a brand connect. Mercedes did the same crash test and all of that, and then they build on it. But to your point, it's interesting that now, even with that, we have evolved. It's more on now experience. Beyond, I think experience is includes emotional connect, functionality, and the whole ambience of those interactions as well. I mean, it's not just, oh, I follow this, or, that. For example, Apple. I know, everywhere you can probably fit Apple in any marketing example, I think. But functionality, that's how they position themselves, that they are the superior. They build that emotional connect and all of that. But then even the experience, if you go to an Apple store, so they've thought through unboxing. I think they changed the game pretty much. So it's interesting. I mean, that, we look at it how things evolved.
So if you were to recalibrate our original definition of customer experience, then I think the product functionality is assumed to be given. What has happened in the last few, I would say, last 10 years is some of these digital native companies,
Mm.
uh, in the in the in the spirit of accelerating their go to market, they would go with a relatively lesser evolved product. The entire idea of lean startup has been on
Mm.
some of those pieces, but doesn't take away the fact that unless a product is ready to fulfill a customer need,
Mm.
no amount of customer experience can compensate for lack of product features in first place. So that becomes the core. Now, if the product is the core and we have taken care of the core, then the question is, do we position it as product feature superiority, or we position it as a emotional connect.
Hmm.
And sometimes it would not be a binary choice between the two.
Hmm. Hmm.
Depending upon what life stage that you are in that product life cycle, you might decide to do one versus other or both. I was reading up this interesting one which says Japanese are known for quality, but they never talk about quality. I think it was Steve Jobs who said it in
Okay.
one of the sessions, right? They are known for quality, so they would never over-index on quality per se. But this entire rational choice theory, in my mind, is a little it is a little misplaced in the sense most humans don't take decision purely based on rationality,
For
because
sure.
beyond the metrics of deciding what is the right one to go for, on rationality of your short list of three brands, they will come most likely neck and neck.
Hmm.
Then eventually it boils down to what are the other criteria that we can use to make a decision. And
Hmm.
some of it could be emotional. And that emotion might come from the experience that you had as you were
Correct.
evaluating that brand. So if that's
Hmm.
the case, then emotions will trump functionality. But the broad core still remains that we have taken care of the base functionality that we are trying to get a consumer to consider.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yes, not everything is rational. Otherwise, we typically go to the mall thinking we just have to buy one thing, but we end up buying 10 things which we know five of them will not even use it.
Yeah, yeah.
And 2 years down the line, you're like, how do we declutter the
Manage.
house?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, it customer experience, I think it moves between marketing, tech, and that's what makes it interesting as well because even rational, irrational, all of these things are also thought through. Even irrational things, there'll be a pattern in certain things. What somebody, for example, I would probably not buy a car irrationally. Probably when I'm standing there, I may buy a, a let's say a cricket gloves or something like that. Let's say if I'm passionate about that, I'm sure there's certain patterns. But yes, I think that's what brands are also looking capturing on. But coming back to customer experience, so are there any frameworks? I mean, because I remember we talking about it. So, like zero moment of truth, and there are a couple of more. So, what are some of the frameworks with which we can look at CX or plan for CX?
Yeah. So there are two ways to look at it. Framework to diagnose where we could improve, and framework to design the journey itself. If you're looking at framework to design the journey, then we need to go to customer journey mapping or more kind of a design thinking temperament wherein we are designing the experience such a manner
Mm,
that if it's a new company who is trying to get their product out, it will be a good idea to consider the design thinking workshop to finalize what would be the different touch points and how do we get people to interact across those touch points. Moment of truth philosophy primarily uh, promoted historically by CPG companies is also a good frame. Equally applies to
mm,
tech companies. It talks about from first moment of truth, wherein you are made aware of a product, right up to post purchase behavior. But there is a zero moment of truth. One of the tech companies spoke about,
mm.
which is even before you are aware of the brand, how
Right.
do you influence people to consider you even before there is no explicit need for the one. The issue with customer experience per se is there is a concept of what people call a silent majority who
Mm.
would not complain about the product. They will just move away.
Move away.
Similarly, those guys who think passionately about the product would only promote it, and that shows up in NPS. Most of the guys might be sitting in 7 and 8.
Correct.
So, unless the cumulative nature of a product proposition coupled with customer experience gets a user to a community feeling, you would not see them,
Mm.
we would not hear their voice.
So probably once the snowball effect has happened, you'll only see that big snowball coming and hitting you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
Which works the other way around also. There might be over indexation of looking at complaints and using that to ascertain what we need to fix.
mm.
But customer experience comes at a cost. I don't think we would want to have same experience for all customers. And I think overall, the I think banks did it very well when they said platinum, titanium, gold, and
Mm.
according to that, they have a level of service. but the expectation that a baseline customer experience remains the same as long as you have digital journey, because it doesn't cost to have a similar experience as long as the journey is digital. The moment journey moves from digital to physical spaces, which means there is a human involved, that's when you want to classify what kind of service you will entail. We see it all the time when you board the flight.
True.
You see all the time when you go to elite restaurant wherein they have a separate sitting
Right.
capacity for the people whose order might be much bigger than that.
Right.
Uh,
And I think as a customer, it hits you as well that, like you give an example of airline, check in. It's like, first platinum would check in, then gold, silver. And in the end, you're like, now it's my turn. I'm the only one standing and waiting. Then I'll probably go in and, board the plane. And that's where it hits you that probably it's interesting that I control the experience that I want, you know, which
Yes.
tier I want. And
yes. So to the point, if we contextualize in a digital transformation space, if the interactions are digitally, it's okay to deliver similar experiences across different customer segments, irrespective of their value. The moment it becomes non-digital, there would be merit in classifying them into different buckets. But even in digital, if you
but it's
think
a
about,
function of cost then.
it's a function of cost, and therefore there are LinkedIn Basic and there are LinkedIn Premium even on digital
Correct.
side, right? So if we are planning to have a customer experience which is phenomenal and out of class, it will carry a cost. Amazon Prime carries a cost.
Right.
Netflix carries a cost. MX Player is free.
But right. I mean, but for example, even for them, even if you look at a Hotstar or any other app, there are different plans that you can choose. So
They have.
more than the cost for them, it's more on the monetization side. That for them, getting a new person onboarded on the platform, viewing, let's say, a India versus Pakistan match is marginal. I mean, but for them, they want to monetize it, and hence, they have all those max view, and they're launching new innovations. That how they can, you know, it's a different strategy. Then it's not a cost function in that case. So
Yeah.
interesting.
So I think the more I hear from you, I think the realization is that customer experience framework journeys may not be one size fits all
Mm.
based on customers. There could be opportunity to deliver higher value for certain user segments versus not so higher value for low, because it's a cost value equation anyway. So alternate method is if we can use data analytics to predict whether this customer would become a higher value and therefore get them to the door, through the premium door earlier than what they are due for.
Mm.
And that's where the beauty of stitching the data across pre-sales to sales to onboarding to post onboarding would fit in. You might have seen triggers on your mobile phone from some of these apps that we have upgraded you to X tier and Y tier.
Right.
That is one way to use experience to build habit, and then once you get addicted to the habit, probably you will upgrade yourself
Right.
to higher tier to monetize the additional features. Companies might use that.
But I think now bringing a different perspective. Now that we're talking about all this, see, is it that the customer experience or the definition or expectation would vary for different industries? For instance, I use an ICICI Bank app, Zomato app, an Uber app, probably a Hotstar app. In the same day, or in some cases, in the same hour, I use them. But is my expectation same from all these apps? Probably not. Or maybe if I ask a Gen Z, probably they'll say yes. I mean, so it could be. But then, do you think that it's
So I think there would be, how do I say that? So typically there would be one company who will set the benchmarks of customer experience.
Hmm.
Let's say it's an Apple or an Amazon.
Hmm.
Apple,
Digital native
Apple
company.
is on the product side, Amazon is on the service side.
Right?
If you think through making that binary distinction.
Hmm.
Now the question is, would a banking customer would expect a similar nature of service from their own bank? Maybe, but it was wishful thinking. But it also means there's an opportunity. If Apple tomorrow becomes a bank, the entire migration will go to
Mm.
Apple. It was an interesting thought exercise wherein there was a survey done if people would buy automobile from Apple if they launched it,
Mm.
and a lot more people voted for it because they have built that reputation of one excellent product, seamless experience across the ecosystem,
Yep.
and therefore the or rest assured the quality of product would they would not compromise, and therefore that builds that reputation, that builds that community with the people, that community reaches to a status of cult wherein they
Correct.
would blindly assume if a product is coming from a company that they admire, they would want to try that, and
Right.
therefore they might be more forgiving even if it doesn't meet the highest benchmark that they would have said
Mm.
it does. If it doesn't, even if it doesn't deliver to the promise. And other adjacent pieces, I'm reminded of when the first time Flipkart did their big $1 billion sale, their systems crashed,
Mm.
and the founder sent an email saying we apologize. Right. So that authenticity is one portion of customer experience. Is something that the users slash consumers slash customers would be looking to see if it is really authentic, it is mission driven, or it is just another company
Or a
trying to do
gimmick,
stuff
just to fake it,
just to
till you make
fake it, which would be another dimension for consumers and customers to evaluate companies.
even Apple or Tesla or some of the examples you mentioned. We also touched about the brand values, and in some ways that also translates or reaches the customer to help build that perception. You talk about the FedEx example, where they're instilling that, in a way, I mean, sense of pride as well in employees, and making sure that they feel that they're connected to the end customer. And that also I feel gets reflected to a certain extent. I mean, one great example for me was interaction with Taj Hotel. I mean, post COVID, we happened to do a lot of road trips, and I think in North India, we probably would have visited all Taj properties. Right from, they've opened a lot of new interesting
Yeah,
properties.
yeah,
Taj Theog, Rishikesh,
yeah,
a lot of those properties. And obviously, I mean, we stayed for like weeks over there, and you get to get talking with the restaurant manager every day, and talking about
yeah.
it. It was interesting. I was talking to him, and he's like, he's been with Taj Hotels for 25 years. I mean, yes, there are perks in it, and they get to travel all over India, and there's that sense of pride that they have. But then one interesting thing which he said, I mean, that was a very new, it changed my perspective altogether. He said that we are taught that when you go and talk to the customer, and let's say come back to the kitchen, or you go talk to the kitchen, customer had said something, in that whole interaction, you're not representing the hotel, you're representing the customer. So you'll come back to the kitchen representing the customer, that customer wants this, what can we do? And you go back and then deliver that message or whatever that service is to the customer. That's very interesting now. That, and probably though these are the little things, the values that a brand inculcates, or how employees look at it, that probably makes is the differentiator between brands. Because with Taj, service is something which you always go for. There's a certain expectation. That's probably because you feel so comfortable that whatever you need, you have like 10 people who are representing you inside that hotel who will get that done or help you. If not, they'll at least tell you. I remember, so we went with our baby. He was just 1.5 year old, and we wanted a baby cot, and they had a very flimsy one, but they understood our point. They called the carpenter, they made a new one, and I mean, it's not like we wanted a fancy one, but it was amazing. It was functional. I mean, exactly what we wanted. I mean, I think those are the little things. And since then, I think we have become Taj Gold members. We only go to Taj Hotel wherever we now start looking at where Taj is in India, and let's go make have a holiday
Wow,
there.
wow.
So a great example, I think, again, about
Right.
how that value system, and I think like Apple also for that matter, how I think people used to follow Steve Jobs. That led to the cult that Apple was, and to a certain extent, Elon Musk could be for different reasons. But then everybody knows that he's cutting edge, and probably he'll focus so much about the product that I need to catch up as a customer, that to use that product, or to be able to catch on that this is something which is out there. I can use for my convenience.
Yeah, I think that is that is one of the critical pieces. As a founder of a company, if the values are more mission driven
Mm.
and that top down message is very clear, that we stand by that mission or we don't. Founders and the founding team has the right set of missions and values. uh, those values percolate down to the employees. To the point, on Tata Group, there is a book from one of the Tata employees, Tata Stories, Tata Log. There are two of them, and speaks about not just now, even back in pre-independence era, how the founder of Tata Group was so much insistence on giving back to the society. That is one. Some of the welfare schemes, social welfare schemes that we consider now as given, like post-retirement benefits, those were incubated within Tata Group.
Right.
So if the group has a legacy of staying true to certain values,
Right.
it makes the employees remain with the company and remain committed to the cause, and it will show in the interactions that they would have. The famous um, uh, the Mumbai
Right.
terrorist attack in 2008 and what happened in Taj property in Mumbai is an incredible example of
Right.
wherein uh, most of the people, in fact, all the people from the staff were working shoulder to shoulder with the. Uh,
It's only when you have the strong values that, at the heat of the moment, you can take those decisions, or probably have courage, or, to take those decisions, like I think what
yeah,
they
we
did.
talk about that. So while growing up, I remember at least the perception was that these strong values come only in defense and armed forces because you are something beyond your own to
Mm.
for the country. But the ability of an organization to do it even at a half the scale, wherein you see the purpose or a cause bigger than yourself, is what will get them through.
Right.
And that will show in, if the customer experience is broken, the employee would go out of the way, including in some cases violating the rule book,
Mm.
to be more customer centric, and delivering to the point, to be the custodian of customer
Customer,
as against being a spokesperson for the
the
chef
brand.
in the kitchen.
Right. Which is the easier thing to do in a way.
Which is the easier thing to do. I think
To represent the chef and say, that's all we can do and that's all we have in the menu.
that is
or,
exactly the product oriented mindset, right? That is
Right.
exactly, any car will sell as long as it's black.
Right.
But I think those were the days when they could afford it, but they can't really afford it in this time and age when customer has so many choices.
Mm.
So if there's so many choices, they will go to the next door.
Mm.
And therefore, if this is the differentiator, company needs to decide if they are okay to play on that differentiator, or uh, or use other alternative means to
Mm.
establish themselves.
But having said that, I'm sure that a lot of examples of CX gone bad as well, gone wrong. Probably they intended to do it, but then it did not land well. I think.
So so when we say personalization, there is a thin line between personalization and creepiness.
Correct. Yeah.
And that famous incident where Target was caught
Yeah.
with their
Right.
wherein they started um, sending material or brochures related to pregnancy to a teenage girl back in.
So I read about it. So I mean, the article goes back 10 years, of course. But then, so it was very interesting that so they had created a predictive model
Yeah.
which had an accuracy rate of I think some 87% or 90%, and based on that, they predicted that if, let's say, somebody who's bought a particular lotion has probably bought a bag which can double up into a diaper bag, has bought zinc or magnesium, vitamins, or probably there's a high probability that, or 87% probability that this person is pregnant and they are due in 3 months, I think. And that's what they started sending out personalized
Message.
coupons.
Yeah.
And suddenly I think they got a call from one of the fathers to the store manager. He was shouting that, are you encouraging pregnancy to my teenage daughter?
Yeah.
And then only after 2 weeks he called back to apologize that there's certain events happening in the house he was not aware
Aware
of.
of.
And it's actually true, and that's why they realize that it's the thin line between personalization and being creepy. And that's why I think they still use it, of course, I mean, as a personalization tool, but they send 20 coupons, 5 would be personalized and 15 would be more
Yeah.
like randomized. But somebody who's let's say who's 7 months pregnant probably would see those 5 coupons and only apply for those, use those coupons. So I think that's where we are evolving. And there's another example I saw. I think in the early stages of chatbots, it did not land well, because I think how it was trained was that whatever conversations they hear, they'll grow their intelligence, and then those chatbots will start talking the same language. And in real world, people don't talk. I mean, people typically abuse, use all kind of languages. And then I think it backfired Microsoft, where the chatbot started abusing and started interacting like that. And that's why they had to stop it, and then rethink through the strategy. And
The key lever for some of this personalization is artificial intelligence, as we call it now,
Mm.
and mining the data through. Now, as it happens with any algorithm to predict what's going to happen, it will have false positives and false negatives.
Mm.
Now, the question is, and the good way to explain that is, in the false positives, we are talking about hallucination.
Mm.
Now, if it starts hallucinating based on the data which is fed in, that is a one problem.
Mm.
But the other piece is its ability to learn on the job, because if chatbot was deployed before it even started learning,
Mm.
then that's a problem. But what people do now, most of the tech companies, before they deploy the chatbot, they would train them on uh, a lot of data before they deploy in the market, and therefore at
Correct.
least some of those pieces won't happen. But currently, the generative AI based chatbots still say that uh, for most of the companies have a disclaimer which talk about that it is still in experimental stage, and therefore they are, in a way, if you think about it, asking for more tolerance level from users,
From customers.
from customers, to the point that we made customer would be more forgiving in case tech company A has launched it and B has not, and the B says, we are working on it, stay with us, it is an experimental one, it might not be fully evolved, but just like we have done in the past, we are committed to delivering the same product slash service to you.
Mm.
And therefore customers might still be okay to try that out.
But that's the point. Might still be okay. But if somebody else has found the code to it, how to go about doing it, I think then they'll probably have the majority share.
Yeah, it's getting now close to home, but see, the way to think about is the first mover might not be the person who would win the race. It has never happened in the history of industry. If you go to Ford example, they launched their model in 1908, but the first automobile was designed and launched in 1886 by Benz group of companies, which we now know, Mercedes-Benz, right? Similarly, even in social media, what we know as the largest social network was not the first to get to market.
Correct.
Nor the search engine, as we know, the largest, was not the first to get to market.
Mm.
So it need not necessarily be a race to get to the first position. But yes, it does give first mover advantage, which means anybody who comes next will have to work twice as hard to get the customer attention. Because there are services slash products where there is no option for a second.
Mm.
If you are buying a shirt or a trousers, okay to go to multiple brands. But if you have hooked to a generative AI based chat on one platform, it would be hard for a person to try out another one.
Correct.
And to that extent, unless the product slash service is phenomenally better, then it would make the friction much more harder. But on generative AI, my personal belief is the story is not yet over across most of the tech companies. Everybody is launching their own LLM model, and in a year, 2 years' time is where things would become clearer on who is the potential winner, runner up, and so on and so forth. In the entire space, my belief is there is no clear path to the use cases to deploy it, and the infrastructure required to get the GPUs, etc., for this to work on real business problems might make it very, very cost prohibitive for most organizations to deploy in first place.
Mm.
So if it can't get past the academic, I won't say academic, but past the information value for the users like you and me, its
Mm.
uh, ability to monetize that becomes limiting.
Correct.
Uh,
Just like a product life cycle, it's the innovators right now probably who are jumping on
yes,
it. But at least it's definitely not an hallucination. We have gone beyond that. That it's here to stay.
yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But uh, try try writing in some of these language learning models something which is not true,
Hmm.
and it will return back. Just say you type in is 2 plus 2 is 9.
Hmm.
It'll respond back, yes, indeed, it is 9.
Hmm.
At least that was the case a couple of months ago, and now things are getting better and better. But
Hmm.
uh, the idea was user generated content will help them refine their own learning, and if user generated content is giving false data, and unless that is validated with the historical data, it might create more and more hallucination,
Hmm.
for the lack of better word, for the same set of use cases.
Interesting. I want to come to my next topic, I think, which is very close to us. That how do we measure CX? The analytics behind CX, because there are multiple perspectives, and I think you wrote an article also that a couple of years back that it's neither your gut or the hippo who rules the marketing decision, which probably applies to CX decisions also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, interesting article. You'll probably talk about that.
Measurability is currently an issue. If you were to classify into two buckets, one is customer experience, more about what people think about the brand, perception that they have about the brand, then is no better way to measure it than asking the customers themselves. That's where the survey would come in.
But that's the classical way, right? That's
That's a
more like
classical way.
post-mortem. Things have happened. Now you're looking at NPS or a CSAT score to see.
Yes. So that becomes one set of metrics that one could look at, but they are good indicators to see if they are trending in right direction or not. And now what people are doing is when they design these NPS surveys, there are third and fourth level of questions there wherein you can trace back to which function is responsible for bringing it down.
Mm.
And therefore it becomes actionable to some extent. They do it every quarter and they see if the marketing as a function is trending up versus operations which is trending down. Then they might do a follow-up focus group discussion to uncover specific area within operation which it warranties little more focus. But more than that, the other possible viability to measure it would be to watch people behavior and not ask them what.
Mm.
And that's where some of the data available would be helpful. Would be if you are if you run an app, is the average spent time spent on the app trending up, trending down?
Mm.
Is your churn rate going up or down? Is your average order value going up or down? Are there certain sections of your website which are not getting the traction that they were getting in the past?
Mm.
So one is on the asking the survey and one is watching the behavior. Between these two, it could give some indications on that things are broken.
Mm.
Other more holistic view would be to just map the journey through design thinking
Mm.
and then see what logically makes sense to take away or add in to the entire journey that the customers have. When journeys are designed, they are usually designed with the product orientation. And
Mm.
when when things do break, it is difficult to pinpoint what could be the potential areas where it broke, and therefore that behavior tagging becomes
Mm.
a early warning signal, for the lack of better word, to find where do we start. The very fact that the customer journey straddles from being aware of the brand via a brand marketing team,
Mm.
and then followed by, if it's a long consideration cycle product, there would be a sales team which would come in,
Right.
and then there would be onboarding team which is separate from the sales, and then there's a service team which is separate from the onboarding team. In that case, some of those behavioral measures across
Mm.
this journey, and how, if even if across segments your average time between these stages is changing, would be a good indicator if product needs to be fixed. Because when journey breaks, either it's a process where we handheld the customer from the initiation to post purchase, which is breaking, or it's a product feature
What is
which is
interesting?
lacking.
So when you talk, so you're talking more from the process standpoint. Like you're
Mhm.
saying, they typically think from the product, that right from thinking of the moment when somebody would want that product to they would purchase, like onboarding a customer and all that. But there's another perspective looking through the customer's lens.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not very different, but if you look through that, there are different stages, like going back to Kotler. Okay. I think going from need generation to information search to evaluation to purchase, post purchase. Now, in all of that, nowadays companies, especially, I mean, not just digital native companies, I think every company, there's no option now. Uh, they have those campaigns running for each of those phases, right? And each of those phases would have micro journeys or micro objectives of customers. And then for those, maybe they're tailored campaigns. For example, in the need generation, social plays a key role in terms of, generating that need, bringing that gap between my current state and aspirational state, and then letting me know, no, I need to buy a new refrigerator or a new car or whatever it is. And then from information search, I know probably search engines would play a key role in that, because people would come and they search, they will tell what they want. And then from there on to evaluation, to looking at the likes of YouTube, probably what how to videos people see, to what review websites people go to, even come to my website, brand website, let's say, and see products. And then purchase would happen either on my brand e-commerce site or marketplace like an Amazon or a Flipkart or a Myntra. And then post purchase, like call center and all of that. Now, each of those stages and depending on the product, depending on the industry, there'll be certain platforms which will be more relevant for the customer. And again, it probably makes sense to apply that lens, that if somebody is coming, if you're running a campaign on social for need generation, the KPIs should be awareness. KPI should be how many visitors slash divided by a certain geography density, how many we are reaching, or how many content consumption. Likewise on information search, what content people are consuming, more on that. And then evaluation is how they're engaging with the different features, functionality. And likewise, purchase is add to cart, order conversion. And then we apply that lens, and while we do that, and then there's voice of customer, there are tools, tech out there which captures, like you're saying, NPS, CSAT. And then probably combine the two and look at it, that both the observation part while they're doing it and the voice of customer as well. I mean, probably voice of customer, I feel it's more like it helps in the long term strategy, that what happened in the last 3 months, my NPS, CSAT, what part is broken down, then translating that to, like you said, which part of which function in the organization is responsible for fixing that. And all the other digital metrics that we get are probably could be more real time. And we talk about personalization, real time personalization, the, now with CDPs coming into play, and a customer data platform and all these things, that the ability to target users at real time, personalize the experience is now there. I mean,
Yeah. So I think coming back to the binary between asking the customer and watching their behavior, this would fit into watching the behavior.
hmm,
Now, watching the behavior through the funnel is what
right,
we are
right.
attempting to do here. That is one way to look at it, because then we are looking at uh, all the metrics in a manner which could be a leading indicator to understand if there is something which needs to be fixed. And a systemic way to do that would be, if you look at the waterfall, and if that waterfall in terms of ratio of metrics from one stage to another are changing, that is one reason to see if that reason is because of customer experience or something else.
Mm.
In COVID, waterfall broke for everyone.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
So which is altogether a different event. But yes, totally agree with you in terms of watching that funnel is a good indicator of if something needs to be changed in how people are interacting with the brand communication, when there is no explicit need which has been stated by the user at the broad level. Is our communication making aware of the proposition that the brand holds itself? And if the key objective of the campaign was only brand awareness, did we
Mm.
make an impact on that brand awareness in first place? Or we could swap it, if not brand awareness, some of those engagement metrics, like how long if it was a video, how long was the video uh, was watched by the user.
Right.
And post that, if you want to develop a journey in terms of remarketing those users to nurture them through the funnel, how healthy those metrics look like as they move from one stage to another.
Right.
So to the point on what metrics we use between the brand and the behavior, between the mind measures as we call it, and the performance measure, those would be two classification. Within that, there could be these marketing metrics which could give us a sense if something is broken. The real challenge really in some of these approaches is, if there is a customer experience guy trying to evaluate it, they would not be able to make a easy distinction between whether it is because of experience or something else. There could be multiple reasons why that.
Mm.
It could be because of experience, it could be because of product, it could be because of
Platform.
competition.
Competition.
It could be because last month you were doing top of the funnel, which was 100,000, and this month your top of the funnel has gone from 100,000 to 150,000. So cumulatively speaking, you've gone to 250,000. Now, at that additional volume,
Mm.
the funnel would not behave in the same manner it was behaving last quarter.
Correct.
So ability to narrow down whether it's a customer experience problem or a case of diminishing returns, because
Mm.
now we have saturated the audience that we want to reach out, is something to make sure that we are not hallucinating for customer experience being the
Being over obsessed about it, or
obsessed about it is one watch out, I would say.
But-
Uh,
but again, to that, probably then organization or brands need to l- look at different customer segments. Like for example, there could be a new inflow of, you ran a campaign, you added, 2 million new users, but those are new users, let's say. But don't apply the same lens you apply for let's say your existing users. I mean, some of the A/B testing, let's say, that we do for brands as well, we apply those lens, new versus repeat. I mean, even if
yeah,
I'm making any changes in the shopping cart, the existing user may still not see it because he knows how to get things done. He's been buying it from my brand, let's say, for 10 times. But the new customer would probably have a higher I mean, we'll have a higher influence on the new customer interaction. So probably looking at multiple, segments of users and then see, rather than like applying one size fits all
yeah, just
APIs
that
to.
from a marketing standpoint, when you do ads, there is no easy way to cut existing versus new at the top of the funnel. That's the only watch out, but otherwise it's okay. You would need to build an architecture wherein you are excluding those users before it goes out.
Mm.
Your acquisition campaign might end up reaching to existing users as well,
Right.
unless you exclude those customers. But yes, between the existing and new, the funnel would look dramatically different. The other day we were evaluating some of these existing versus new, and the ratio was almost 1:3 in terms of performance of the users through the funnel. So unless we make sure that they are looked totally differently in terms of what the benchmarks are, we might be chasing the wrong problem.
Mm. It can be, I mean, a lot of these metrics can be misleading as well. And I think especially with the likes of so many new tools coming in, when we talk about that, the power of analytics, or it's become so easy for somebody to, just go and apply any predictive model. But it has a, there's a flip side to it as well, that it's easy, but then the difficult part is to the interpretation, or first to check a validity of that data, if it's correct or not. And that's, I mean, I've seen a lot of people making that mistake, that it's like you feed in something. Of course the platform tool will give
Yeah.
out something, and that is how it is designed. It will not say, the data is incorrect or this model cannot be applied. It'll try to fit itself and show you something, but then how do you interpret, how do you judge that if it was the right thing, right model to be applied, was the data clean or not? And then interpretation of that again applies your marketing lens, customer lens, that all the segmentation, that how you interpreting that insight as well.
That brings us to the bias on analytics and measurement. And my favorite story is Second World War, wherein it apparently Second World War was the first war when fighter jets were used.
Hmm.
And back then, odds of a plane getting back to the base safely was roughly 50-50.
Right.
And since Air Force was relatively a new unit, most of the senior commanders in Air Force were the ones who were on deputation from Navy. And therefore, when this problem was stated to them that they need to improve the survivability of the planes, they said we should put more armor on the plane, because that's what they knew from their naval warfare days, wherein you put in more metal on the hull of the plane, the
Right.
outer body of the ship, right? And somebody said if you put in more armor, the plane won't take off. And there's a trade-off between the ammunition that the plane can carry and how much armor you would put on the plane.
Hmm.
It's an interesting story. Back in those days, there was an analyst called Abraham Wald who was running a statistical research group out of Columbia, if I remember correctly, in New York. And when he looked at the sketches of the plane who were returning from the bases, and he suggested we should put more armor where there are less bullet shots.
Hmm.
This is counterintuitive, because if usually people would say let's put more armor where there are more bullet shots, and his argument was this is not the full data. We are
Right.
missing the planes who never came back to the base, and we are basing our decision based on only half the data. So the bias in terms of what we analyze based on what is available to us, and within that, if attempt to draw conclusions based on thin data might result in taking a decision which might be much costly.
Correct.
If the customer experience feature which says my CSAT scores went down significantly, and if we go after that and that is correlated with another feature, and we attempt to fixing one but not taking care of the other, it's not going to make any difference to CSAT score when we go back to the user again. But interestingly, back to the Abraham Wald story, the man who saved so many planes based on his analysis,
Hmm.
the research that he did was so classified that the US government made it public only 30 years later. That's the
Hmm.
rule that they have. Cut to late 1940s, he was on official visit to India on the invitation of Pandit Nehru,
Hmm.
and the man who saved so many planes and pilots himself died in a plane crash. His plane crashed in Nilgiris, so that's on the somber note. But that's the tragic part of the story. But measurement bias is a big deal. The analytics bias is a big deal. They say if you torture the data hard enough, it will confess to anything.
Yeah.
And if you start with a confirmation bias or a measurement bias, you might end up taking decisions which are not necessarily getting us to anywhere. When we do A/B testing, as you know, if the data is thin, the statistical power is low.
Correct.
You might end up misinterpreting the results. And we've seen time and again analysts in their endeavor to arrive at a conclusion might stop the test
Right.
because A/B test carries a cost, and literally every A/B testing platform available right now across the globe has statistical power at 65%, which means there's a
Mhm.
35% error rate that could potentially have. Now, if it is set as 65% itself with a 35% error rate, now if it's a marketing decision, one could argue still
Mm.
it is a huge error rate to account for. So, based on what is important versus what is good to have, there might be merit in raising this bar manually outside these A/B testing platforms to see,
Mm.
are we okay with 65 or we need higher level of threshold to take a call on adding
Depends
additional
on the
feature.
industry also. For example, if it's insurance, they would want 99%. But if it's a, let's say, a FMCG brand marketing to a particular segment of users, they could still be happy with 65%.
So in marketing, people say 80 is okay,
Mm.
but the A/B testing companies, because they are testing feature, they are okay with 65 as well. So that's the distinction, as you rightly
Right.
said. In pharmaceutical drugs, it's a matter of
Right.
life and death. In case of aeroplane safety, it's a matter of life and death. So 99.99% reliability on some of those is a given. But in places where the cost of
The risk.
decision is not so high and speed is more important than precision, people might be okay with a lower bar.
Mm.
If you want to launch a feature which says I have a 65% confidence it gets you a market share that you need, you might still be okay with that. But if that feature addition costs you $1 million versus costs you a $50,000 to enable, that's wherein one possibly want to look at the trade-offs between accuracy and speed.
Yeah, it's like a triangle: speed, accuracy, and cost. I mean, at best
Yes.
you can have two. Optimize for two.
No, that's correct.
Challenges in CX transformation.
I think one biggest challenge is the organization silos.
Hmm.
Other is this is nobody's responsibility, prime responsibility,
Hmm.
usually.
Hmm.
Which means unless it is driven from the CEO's office, it will be so much hard to get this done.
Hmm.
In the midst of all the metrics that the C-suite will be chasing, more on growth or on market share, that gets neglected.
Hmm.
So if you were to call out the challenges, one challenge is organization silos. Two is it's not a priority, and
Hmm.
three is it's not easy to measure the return on CX in first place. There are
Right.
studies which will talk about the value of CX, how it translates to your market share and your and your growth and your revenue, but the linkage of customer experience to some of those financial metrics is hard to get to.
Right.
Which means unless the founders or the CEO believes that this is the right thing to do, it might not get done in the true spirit of being customer centric.
Right.
Uh, that is one thing to watch out for. Which means one way to handle that, that should be the next one, is if we either we get an external coach.
Hmm. I was coming to that. Do companies need a CX coach? Because I think in one of the points you were discussing, you said the CX guy would do this, and I was like, it's a big assumption to assume that a brand would have a CX guy.
So so there are places where you would have chief customer officer as a role, and that role has the that title now is more prevalent in the last 10 years than it was in the prior 20. um, that guy's job is to make sure that he's a custodian or she's a custodian of the customer. But in most companies it will be easier for them to hire an external coach
Hmm.
than trying to do it in house, because of shared responsibility across multiple functions makes it harder to move it.
Right.
So if you hire a coach, you will get the benefit of benchmarking it to your peers, but also benchmarking to best of the industry, the Amazons and the Apples of the
Right.
world. You would also get the benefit of speed. External folks are would have a finite duration to complete it, and therefore likelihood of this getting multiple um, deferment slash timelines, because as I said, this is not a priority for anyone,
Hmm.
is much harder. Third one is um, if this as a role rolls up to, for the duration of the assignment, rolls up to the CEO, that makes the job much more easier for people, because all the functional heads from operations to product to service to marketing to brand would know that uh, the consultant or the coach will go to the boss and let's try
Mm.
to
Yeah, because
try to
otherwise
rally.
each function will optimize for their objectives, which is right in their own way. But that might defeat the purpose of being custodian of the customer, end to end,
They might,
hand holding the customer end to end.
yeah, they might maximize for local minimize against maximize for global
Yeah.
maximize, they say. So yes, but from a um, but I still believe from an ideal state scenario, we are nowhere close to that in most companies. Uh, unless the functional silos um, agree to certain metrics which they would be responsible for, and a way to link those metrics to
Mm.
overall CX score, it will be harder to move the needle.
And some of the success stories we hear, it's mostly the founder or the CEO is the ambassador for CX. So that makes it probably like relatively easy.
I think that's an interesting one. So if you look at the history of some of these tech companies which have disrupted the incumbent,
Mm.
uh, they have
Netflix.
disrupted the incumbent because they delivered much better customer experience, which was cutting across multiple departments, which the incumbent could not do on
Could not.
their own.
Like Netflix, classic example.
No,
Mm.
exactly. So um, if it is, and that's why all the more reason for an external coach to try to at least attempt to stitch it together in a seamless manner, as against
Mm.
internal organizations trying to make do with existing metric and come up with a metric which might masquerade, what's the word, masquerade as a customer experience metric, while there is not one. uh, but until we get to that, I think those functional siloed metric still might be okay to um, give some early warning signal to
Right.
look for. But CX coach is definitely an excellent proposition for brands to consider.
Yep. Cool. Thank you so much. I think
Thanks for
as
having me.
always, I mean, after everything, every time I've met you, interacted with this, there's so much key takeaway. So thank you so much
Pleasure.
for
Thank you
having
for
this
having me.
discussion. And yeah,
Thanks again.
thank you. Thanks, Tushar.